This is a CBC podcast.
Listen to this. This is one hand, left hand. Those are tense, baby.
Remember when Bic came out with their For Her line of pens? Pink pens, just for women, and our tiny, precious hands. It ticked a lot of people off because, in case anyone hasn't noticed, women can use regular pens just fine. It's also ironic because there are other things that should have a version designed with women in mind. Pens just aren't one of them. This is the debate that's happening in the world of classical piano right now. I'm AC Rowe, and this is The Doc Project. The piano, as we know it, was built for the larger hands of a man. That leaves a lot of women and smaller-handed men struggling to play. Okay, I know what you're thinking. And maybe for your after-school piano lesson at the rec center, this does not matter that much. But when it gets to the big leagues, who pianos are designed for is a big deal. This makes and breaks careers. And with the help of one Canadian, everything could change. He designed a piano that could level the playing field for small-handed pianists around the world. So why have you never heard of it? Andrea Bellemare wanted to know more. This is her documentary, Right Hands, Wrong Piano.
Okay, so we've just left the paved road, and we're now entering into, it says warning, gravel roads. These are private logging roads, and we're going to cut across Vancouver Island over to Bamfield.
I'm with Chris Donison. He's a composer, conductor, pianist, and inventor. And we're in a car bumping our way across Vancouver Island, and this drive is going to take 4 hours.
It feels remote, like on this road, one solitary telephone pole with one solitary power line on it.
Well, you haven't seen anything yet. We just started.
We're driving all this way to see a piano, but not just any piano. It's special because the width of the keys has been reduced to make it easier to play with small hands. It's also the piano that started a partnership between Chris Donison, the artist, and David Steinbuehler, the builder. And today, maybe, Chris will let me play it.
This is the piano that had made for it the very first smaller keyboard at the 7/8 scale that we now call the DS standard 40 years ago. And it's a full-size concert Steinway D. Of course, there are smaller keyboards on many other pianos, but I mean, the real test comes with a full-size piano. And not only that, but this is the original.
Chris first had the idea of a smaller keyboard when he was studying music at university in the 70s. He landed on the idea of a keyboard that was 7/8 the size of a regular one. It took a year or so to figure out if it was even possible to do. Then, an engineer built him the prototype to fit his Steinway grand piano. And so Chris began his lifelong journey to bring the smaller keyboard to the world. So what difference does it make if the keys are smaller anyway?
Because, you see, playing the piano, it's not just about the stretch from one place to another. It's not at all that. It's that when you play the piano, there's roughly 100 different physical kind of touches and things that you have to do that all involve movement of some kind. And it just so happens that all of them are easier by a quantum when your hand is larger and over more of the keys at the same time. So here we are.
4.5 hours later, we arrive at the Bamfield Marine Sciences Center. Chris keeps the piano here for a summer festival he directs, Music by the Sea.
It's got this cover on it, which protects it. Get that cover off of there. And the most important item that I have with me today is the key. If I did not have this key, I would not be able to play it. Aha! And there it is. Steinway and Sons.
Did you play a few notes?
Oh, okay. Play a few notes. A few notes. Well, we've been driving for 4 hours here, so the hands are not really...
How did it feel when you got to play it for the first time?
Oh, that's a really great question. To really understand this completely, you have to realize that for those pianists out there that have been practicing for a lifetime, trying to play these difficult passages, been in pain, trying to stretch, the experience of having bigger hands, is something that's foreclosed to you. It's never going to happen to you. Once you're an adult size, you're not going to get bigger. You'd have to be dead and reincarnated. So to get the smaller keyboard gives you the experience of having bigger hands that you'd always wondered what that would be like, right? And guess what? It's way better than you ever thought.
Do you remember what the first song you played on this piano was with the small keyboard?
I think I would have probably tried whatever it is I was working on at the time. And I think it was a Chopin sonata. I think it was that B minor one.
What would you have been thinking while you were playing it, do you think, with your new 7/8 size keyboard?
Well, I thought it was possible, but it was still not easy. It was still very difficult, right? But it was possible. That was the big difference. Now, I mean, by the time I got the little keyboard, I was too old. I was 30. I thought of the idea in my 20s, but it took 5 or 10 years to get it made, right? So by the time I even had it, I was well past the point where I would have been a piano playing professional of classical music. I played for a career, but it wasn't that. It was jazz and show music and things like that I could play. But it was too late by then. So the point is that the smaller size needs to be available from the beginning.
Chris says it's especially important for women to have access to a smaller keyboard early.
Even if you're willing to make the argument that for males, the piano we've got is okay. Even if you would accept that, which I don't, but even if you did. Our species has a female bell curve, which is different. And every species is different, like certain birds. Sometimes the female is bigger, sometimes smaller, but there's a number. There's an average number. And for humans, it's 7/8. So females are on the average 7/8. And that's half the population, actually slightly more than half the population. So at least half the population should have a piano keyboard that at least only 7/8.
Some of the greatest pianists of the last 100 years had enormous hands, and they're men, like Vladimir Horowitz and Rachmaninoff, or Canadian pianist Oscar Peterson. Although, if you play jazz, it's not quite as bad to have smaller hands.
And so you can be a great jazz player and not have to be able to play walking tenths in your left hand nowadays.
I first figured out that I could never play those when I was trying to play Christmas Time Is Here by Vince Guaraldi.
Oh, yeah.
It's all ninths, tenths, and octaves in your left hand.
Yeah, and you had a heck of a time trying to do that, I guess, right? Let me see your hand. I haven't seen your hand. Oh, now, hold it. Now, here's this moment for you. You just finished asking me, how great was this? When was the last time you've been playing the piano?
Probably about a year ago.
Okay, so you played fairly recently.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Have you been, how uncharitable of me to be not thinking all this time. I forgot that you had played. I mean, you told me that, but I was thinking of you as a reporter that didn't know anything about the piano.
Yeah.
But you have played the piano, and you had the problem
Yeah.
with a small hand.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking right now? What's it going to be like to try playing?
Yeah, I think it's going to feel good.
I think we got to turn the microphone around here. I think you got to try this.
All right. Will you hold it while I try playing?
I will.
Okay, hold on. It's going to sound noisy.
Okay, here we go. I'll move over here. Unbelievable. How close?
Whoa! This is like... I can reach an octave really easily. Like, really easily.
That's what you need, really easily.
Wow.
For 11 years,
So
Chris's 9-foot grand piano with a small keyboard was the only one of its kind in the world. But in 1991, Chris owned a bed and breakfast in Niagara-on-the-Lake while he worked as the music director of the Shaw Festival. He brought his piano with him from Victoria, and that's where he met David Steinbuehler. Steinbuehler is the S in the DS standard, the name of the small piano keyboards. Chris, the artist with the dream, met David, the doer with the technological ability, the person who could bring Chris's idea to the world.
These looms here were built here, were invented here.
Oh, wow.
David Steinbuehler's family owns and operates a textile factory in Titusville. That's a small town of about 5,600 people in Pennsylvania. I wanted to find out how a textile person got involved in pianos. David Steinbuehler would say it wasn't an accident that the two men were brought together.
I have a scientific-oriented mind, engineering scientific mind. And for the first 44 years of my life, I was in entrenched atheist. And then when my children were 15, 16, and 19, my 3 children, they got wound up in drug and alcohol. We discovered this in the fall of 1987, and I took all my children to rehab. Looking back, that was the greatest blessing that our family has ever had. My children are now running the textile plant, my 2 boys. My daughter's a missionary.
David says that in the spring of 1998, he had a powerful spiritual awakening that changed his life. He decided to turn his life over to the care of God, and he would pay close attention to what came into his life, who he met, and what he learned. In 1991, he went to Niagara-on-the-Lake with his daughter to see a play. It would be a turning point for him.
Got a room at a bed and breakfast through the Chamber of Commerce. Turned out to be Christopher Donison's.
Do you remember what you thought the first time that you saw his small keyboard?
You know, it was in the morning after we had breakfast, and the piano was there. I could play a little bit, and I tried to, I was, wow, look at that. And I could immediately adapt to it. And then he had conceived the idea of creating a second standard. And I thought, wow, that's a big idea. He had thought out that what it would take would be a computer data bank to collect data and be able to make keyboards on CNC equipment. And I'm standing there thinking, I can do that. But I had no idea what I was getting into with the complexity of the keyboard. I had no idea.
That meeting changed both Chris and David's lives. David felt that it was God's will he should work on making the small piano keyboard. He had engineering knowledge. He came from a line of men who built things with their hands, invented gadgets and gizmos, and made them run. Chris had finally met someone who could take his dream of a small keyboard and make it a reality for the world to see. Chris and David decided to work together to make the Donison-Steinbuehler standard. It would be a 7/8 size piano keyboard that could be used all around the world. And initially they had some success. They came up with another prototype and eventually set that standard. Linda Gould was the first person to buy a small piano keyboard from David Steinbuehler. She had gone to university with Chris in Victoria, where she still lives.
Here I have my lovely, listen to this. This is one hand, left hand. Those are tenths, baby. Now I walk over to, my husband has a lovely Yamaha Concert Grand. Here I am playing tenths on his piano. Forget it, not even a possibility.
Linda did her degree in music and had won some silver medals from the Royal Conservatory of Music for her exams, but playing was hurting her.
It's a very deep, tiring, fatiguing pain. It's just this kind of overuse of a muscle or many muscles that just makes you tired. People with small hands are always having to deal with more things of how can I work this around? How can I play this so I don't have the pain? Where you get the sharp pain is when you stretch your hand out for a big chord and you come down hard and heavy. Then you get this sharp shooting pain up your arm. And that's just pure damage.
How often would you get that kind of pain?
Most pieces I did workarounds. I loved the Prokofiev 7th Piano Sonata. I loved it and I wanted to play all of it. And so I did what you should never do. I closed my eyes and numbed out the pain, pretended it didn't exist. Performing that piece at the Calgary Planetarium after I graduated, I felt something go about, 2 pages before the end of the piece. I played to the end and I was asked for an encore. I literally had to apologize to the audience and say, something's wrong with my with my right hand, which now has a scar, and I can't play anymore today, not knowing I couldn't play anymore for 3 years.
Eventually, Linda discovered she had a cyst the size of a pea in her wrist. She didn't know if her small hands were to blame, but she was open to trying anything that would make playing less painful. In the early 90s, while on a business trip to Niagara-on-the-Lake, Linda reconnected with Chris. It was then that he told her that his dream was becoming a reality. They got in a car and drove to Titusville so Linda could try the small piano keyboard at David's place. When they got there, Chris and David left her alone with the prototype David had built.
And I'm getting teary just thinking about it, because I sat down, I brought some Chopin, an etude that I'd struggled with at university, had never actually been able to master, Opus 10 number 3, I think it was. A few other things that I had kind of never been able to do. By the time they came back in that hour, I was playing those pieces rather easily. I went, an hour already? Go away again. Leave me alone. And at that point, I said to David, if you are able to manufacture these, you have your first order right now. And it was undescribable, the experience, absolutely undescribable. It was sad, happy, satisfying to a deep, deep, deep level. So many fears, like, was I not good enough? Damn it, I was definitely good enough to have a concert career. I can do this because I had now an instrument that matched my hands the same way the current instrument matches most male European hands.
The small keyboard reinforced to Linda how skewed the world of piano was towards men.
I looked around as a child, and most of my competitors in the festivals, music festivals, were girls. There was a few guys. But then I look at all the people that became the professional pianists. Very few of them are women. Most of them were men. Mathematically, that doesn't make sense to me.
Those girls Linda is talking about, I was one of them. I took piano lessons from age 8 to age 14. I played in competitions in my hometown, and I even won a class playing a Chopin prelude. Like Linda, most of the people I competed against were girls. And when I mentioned to Linda that I tried Chris's piano, she's immediately asking me about it.
Did you feel that relaxation in your hand? That
I didn't know that would be how I would have said it, but I played an octave and I thought, I just hit it.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And it feels like weird, like, no, it shouldn't be that easy. It shouldn't.
So then she's on to me to try her keyboard.
Okay, so just explain to me, what did we just do here?
Okay,
so I'm playing this chord.
It's an 11th,
Yeah.
good old big Vince Guardi chord.
So, yeah,
and you
B,
tried to play it with
E.
your old fingering.
Yeah.
And then we switched the fingering because we're all excited. We just threw the recorder on the floor. You switched your fingering to a new relaxed fingering, and well, let's hear you play it.
All right, so, and then this is my A flat and my C.
A flat and C. Beautiful. And you can play the whole chord at the same time.
I would never have been able to play an 11th chord.
And now I'm going to add the left hand chord to it. Here we go. Play them all together. G flat 13 sharp 11. Bravo!
So Linda bought the first piano with the smaller keyboard, and Donaldson and Steinbuehler even got some media attention. In 1996, the keyboard was splashed across the top of the front page of the Globe and Mail. And then, nothing happened. Small keyboards did not take the world by storm. How come? David Steinbuehler, the one making the keyboards, has some of the
I
answers.
spent a lot of time up here, So this is what I was doing until I met Donaldson.
David says that after he met Chris, the two worked together with David's brother and another employee. They started work on the piano in the loading bay of David's factory.
Yeah, the trucks will, see how the truck backed up there?
Yeah. So out of this whole plant, you were making the piano keyboards in this small space, fluorescent overhead lights. I see brick wall with the window that would go into the main area of the factory on this left side, wood paneling on the walls, a lot of sawdust everywhere. This was where the magic was happening.
Yes, that's right here. Here's where we did it. Yep. Computer was over there. I did a lot of the work at home,
Behind where this washing machine is now, that's where the computer was.
That's right. Well, yeah, little tables around, work benches and stuff.
Now, David's workshop is in the mezzanine of his factory, and it's expanded.
I'll show you where I do most of our programming.
Very complicated.
Yeah.
He's a genius with it. He really is. I'm not trying to embarrass him. I'm just telling you the truth.
The code that comes in. That's what I spend 25 years developing the code, the programming that generates the code that runs this machine.
And it fits on a little red USB key you can carry around in your pocket.
Right. So, yep. Usually we plug it in there.
It wasn't that David didn't want to make the keyboards. He did. But he had to learn a lot in order to build small piano keyboards that could be fitted to existing pianos. David had to come up with a way to accurately measure those pianos.
It's a huge job to get the new action to fit in the piano. If you're building a frame, there's so many measurements that have to be exactly right.
Then he had to create specialized tools to do it right. And that's just the beginning of the many technical details he had to work on.
Because we're going to put the new set of keys on the original frame.
Hours and hours of work. I'm starting to understand at least some of why it was so hard to get small piano keyboards out into the world. But that wasn't the only problem.
Right at the beginning, it became clear that one additional size wasn't enough.
David says Chris just wanted to focus on one smaller size, while he thought there should be a range of sizes. But the biggest roadblock had nothing to do with the technical challenges or Chris and David's differences of opinion.
Articles were written, and Chris was interviewing, and it generated zero interest. The 5 keyboards we seeded at universities generated zero interest. There was no one at the university who championed the idea.
Why do you think that was?
There's a huge catch-22. If the university has a keyboard and the students work with it, play with it, study on it, the minute they leave the university, there isn't one. So it just wasn't happening.
The question is, if you're studying at a university and you're practicing on this keyboard, what do you have at home? What do you have in the practice room? What do you have when you go on to another program at another school? So that's the challenge, I think, right now, is that there's a limited availability.
That's Elaine Rusk. She's a pianist herself and vice president of the Royal Conservatory of Music's certificate program. She oversees all of the conservatory's exams. She actually tried the small piano keyboard at a conference in 2004.
I remember being fairly apprehensive as I approached the keyboard because I was unsure if I'd be missing notes or playing the wrong notes. Playing some simple repertoire, I found that I was able to adjust as I went along, but it occurred to me that if I was to perform on that instrument, it would take a lot of time to prepare, and I wondered if I could undo, decades in some cases of practice of certain pieces, and the way they feel and sit under the hands. But it was an intriguing thought to think that might be a possibility.
So we're talking about women. The other thing that Chris said was that, he saw a lot of women at lower levels. Linda said that as well. And then as you get into higher levels and you look at men who are, or people who are performing around the world, there's so many men who reach those high levels. And, he says in the string world, women start off well and they continue to do well. His argument is that that's possible because string instruments are scalable. We're not seeing that as much, so women may not reach the high levels, the international renown. What do you think about that?
I don't know if that's the reason for it. I think it's an interesting hypothesis, but there may in fact be other factors as well. I mean, I studied with Valerie Tryon, a fine concert pianist, and she seems to get around the keyboard quite effortlessly. I'm just not convinced that keyboard size is the main factor, but it certainly may be a factor. The smaller keyboard right now seems to me like a luxury that isn't going to be available to everybody at this time.
Overall, I mean, do you think that different size keyboards should be widely available to people so that if you're a smaller person, the same way that you might be able to play a reduced size violin, you could play a reduced size keyboard?
You know what? I think that's something the market has to tell us, because the truth is it has to begin in the home. It has to begin with the instrument the student has available to practice. Then I think people would be coming to us and saying, we need to support this by providing an instrument for exams, but that'll be market driven.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you feel that is really important that I should know?
Well, I do have to say I was a little surprised when I heard about this and that you were doing a documentary. I was a little surprised that I haven't really heard much about them in that period between 2004 and 2016.
And I am really grateful there was no interest. That was 20 years ago. It has taken me 20 years to establish the sizes, and to establish the standard and to solve the hundreds of problems in the manufacturing of them to get to the point where we are now. So I just recently contacted Chris to say we are at a place now that he imagined we might have been 20 years ago. He was trying to promote it out into the world, but I sure wasn't ready. He had no clear idea what my problems were. And
For years, Chris and David didn't talk until earlier this spring.
And then he emailed me about just so coincidentally, just a day or two before you called me. And he said, look, Chris, it's been 10 years. I need you to know what's been happening since. And he had a long list of the things that they've done, and they have been doing a lot of work. And he said, and I think it's ready to go global now. I
had come light years in my programming and my development of how to build them. The university studies had happened. The Dallas International Piano Competition was offering them. And the pain and suffering that the keyboards would eliminate was all documented in articles. So much has happened. We are now in a place, I think, to promote the Donaldson-Steinbuehler standard.
Let's see what I can play. I'm gonna do the Oscar Peterson Georgia on my mind, just because that's such a favorite.
Both David and Chris dream of seeing their small keyboards finally going global. So does Linda Gould. She's been playing her little keyboard in her living room for around 20 years.
Music is a communication. It's a form of emotional communication. We want to play music to share with the world, whether it's sharing with our friends, our family. And so if I can't share what I'm doing on this piano with the world, it loses some of its sizzle for me as well. It's just like this sadness. It's gone from one of my greatest joys to a sadness.
Well, you can share it with the world via the magic of radio. Would you like to share a song with us via the radio?
Absolutely.
You just heard Right Hands, Wrong Piano by Andrea Bellmare.